So, what I was thinking for today's session is we're going to be talking a couple of things, but really we're going to share a little bit more about the experiences that we've had in terms of some of the guests that perhaps didn't leave a good taste in our mouth when we hosted them. And what are some of the things that we're doing in terms of a standard operating procedures, in terms of checklists, or some of the preventative measures to try to ensure that we are not having those experiences again. From what we see in general in terms of the business, there's really five common things that we see in terms of patterns that happen that either we didn't catch on time or that could have been prevented beforehand with a simple checklist or some pattern recognition in terms of some red flags when potential guests or even on the corporate side reach out to you to provide them housing. So, as we go through today's session, we'll be sharing a couple of stories in regards to what has happened to us and what are some of the things that we could have done to prevent those issues from happening, as well as what are some of those five patterns that we often see even before we get started with anything in terms of actually providing a providing housing to someone and making sure that we're doing our due diligence. We'll also talk about some systems that we have implemented in the past to try to prevent some of those things from happening. And then at the end, you'll have some concrete support and standard operating procedures to make sure that as you're doing your due diligence, you're having those checklists in place to ensure that your next guest is not a guest from hell. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. But really, more than anything, this session is meant to be interactive. I'll go ahead and start with a guest from hell story that we've had. Some of the things that we kind of caught initially to ensure that we had some preventative measures, but what ultimately ended up failing for us. So I'll go ahead and share a story. I'll also share a couple of images so you guys can see what the problem ended up happening and then how we ended up fixing it. So, or long story short, essentially, we had an insurance relocation claim. At the time, the family had lost their house due to a fire. The family essentially, it's a husband and a wife, two kids, and they also had three big dogs. So the dogs themselves was our primary concern. At the time, we were relatively new. We knew that in the insurance space, the premiums were pretty good, but we didn't necessarily had experience too much in terms of having to deal with pets and how the homeowners would treat them or how they would make sure that they wouldn't go all over the house and pee everywhere or do any damage. This is in our early stage of the business. As you can probably foresee, is that essentially what ended up happening is throughout the stay, it was a 2 month stay. Um, in general, we were doing check-ins with them. We were doing cleanings. We were doing some of the things that you would have thought perhaps we would have done in terms of some of the preventative maintenance. Also, one of the things that the homeowners assured us, is that they would actually have rotation. So at the time when we initially signed the lease with them, we ended up signing a lease with the contingency that there would always be someone with the pets, either by their side or always keeping a check on them. And they worked first, the husband worked first shift, the wife worked second shift. So there would always be someone at the house. So just to show you a little bit in behind the scenes as to what had happened, I'm gonna share my screen, and hopefully Gabriela, Ari, everyone can go ahead and can see my screen as well. Just confirm, let me know if you can see some of the images that I'm sharing.
Sounds your story.
Sounds like a familiar, you've had this situation in the past. Yeah, so what ended up happening, so initially what we ended up doing is we thought we'll go ahead and give it a try. We've had some experiences with pets, but we hadn't had experiences with this kind of pets like German Shepherds, Rottweilers. The poodle was actually pretty calm. One of the things that we realized is that if the homeowners weren't home, and the pets were stressed, they weren't getting walked, they would kind of get rattled. And so in what ended up happening actually happened towards the ending part of the stay. Throughout the first 2 months, everything was fine. There wasn't any issues. We had cleaners there every month checking in, doing cleanings and making sure everything was good. At that point was fine, but what ended up happening towards the later part of the actual stay, the homeowner fell asleep and she forgot to actually lock in the cage. And that was the cage where the Rottweiler is inside the house. And so by the time she had woken up, she discovered that this entire couch had been completely destroyed. And I'll show you guys what it looked like once we ended up getting it replaced. As you can see, this is so much nicer. It's a nice leather couch. This isn't something that you would be able to get pretty much anywhere. We kind of made the mistake that we ended up getting something that was this was a relatively new stage in our business, so we ended up getting something super nice, something that wasn't necessarily replaceable pretty easily, like that you could just find in any of the other stores. So this actually took a bit of time for us to get back with the specialized stores that we had initially bought it. Needless to say, it was a complete mess. It was completely destroyed. For us to get it fixed by someone, like a specialist that would actually work on leather, would have cost as much to replace it. So we ended up just going to the store. They ended up having something similar, but in different color. And so we ended up replacing it with that old one. The other thing that we realized is that they did try to clean after their pets. A lot of these pets have dog hair. And so what they ended up doing is they ended up damaging the vacuum that we had. If you're familiar with some of the brands, this one in particular, like I said, it was one of the newer homes that we had. So we try to make it super nice. The brand for this one is called Shark. The Shark brand is very powerful, and they just ended up just going through it right away. So they tried to vacuum. There was some carpet in the house, and the vacuum just ended up getting completely destroyed. I believe this one was like $150 brand new. So they just went through it once and ended up destroying it with all the dog hairs that they had. They weren't the cleanest, also, at least from what we saw. Our cleaners were essentially doing mostly like light cleaning, just making sure things were good. They weren't necessarily going into like the microwave or doing some of those checkups. They ended up using this. I don't know what they were cooking or what they were doing, but the whole microwave just ended up getting burned. It had to be completely replaced. You couldn't really get any of this dirtiness out of it. It was caked in. So we ended up just replacing the whole thing. You'll also see that there's damage to the carpet. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. So we have a carpet. We also have some pillows. It was a complete mess. The dogs, in general, were taken outside, but there were times that they did have accidents. But that smell of dog or that residue of pee just stayed at the house. We needed to throw this away and completely replace it. How many of you have had something like this happen before?
Every time.
Every
Every
time?
time. Yes.
So, are you finding that you're more not accepting dogs now, or you're still accepting
No,
dogs?
I am actually very pet friendly because I think that that's going to differentiate me from other hosts, but I'm trying to figure out creative ways to ask for a security deposit, but what I'm struggling with right now is figuring out what other damage protection claims I layer on top of that. I think because I'm in the field that I work predominantly with insurance, we get so excited to get paid all these great insurance rates, but then end up having to replace a lot of the quilts, a lot of, things, and then more recently, even furniture. So I'm
Mhm.
trying to figure out what are the, I guess, one kind of figuring out what's an acceptable pet deposit, but then on top of that, maybe layering an insurance damage protection waiver so that I am being reimbursed for all these repetitive things with the pets.
No, and those are great things to think about. And we'll show you kind of how we fixed it and then some other new ways that we're also doing it as well. So let me go ahead and just finish off this quick story in regards to how we actually ended up fixing it. So once they checked out, well, initially when we first talked to them, what we asked is that they had to put a non-refundable security deposit. Initially, we started with $250 per pets. So that really covered around $750 non-refundable just for the pets to be able to stay. We also had asked for $1,750. That's essentially half of what the monthly rent would have been. So essentially, that's what we asked for. I know usually for insurance relocation claims, if they're working, for example, with ALE, a lot of the deposits actually come from the homeowners. They have to actually give that money to ALE Solutions or some of those third party companies. And so essentially, they give them to ALE, and then ALE gives them to us to hold until we finish off the actual lease. So we ended up asking for this amount. We also asked for $450, knowing that there's going to be an additional cleaning. Typically for this house, a deep cleaning goes around 350, so we asked for 450. So they almost gave us around $3,000 for all those fees. Now, we they ended up charging us $600 for the actual cleaning. It was a huge mess. So needless to say, the cleaning fee didn't actually cover for that. There was actually a little bit more. We ended up replacing the couch, microwave, carpet, vacuum, all those things. The total came out to be almost 1,481 out of the 1,750, and then we ended up actually just reimbursing them around $300. Now, if this wouldn't have been enough, we actually added something within the lease that's actually a damage protection insurance. I'll be happy to share a resource for you guys, but essentially, if you go to our school community, we do have a preferred partner that does damage protection insurance. So I'll be happy to share that with you. So the way that we do it now is that if they do have pets coming in, we are pet friendly, but we protect ourselves in a couple of different ways. So the non-refundable security deposit is one. The additional cleaning fee, so we know it's going to be extra, especially if something happens and the pets have accidents, or cleaners are gonna have to actually pay extra to get that clean, and they usually charge us more. The third one is the actual security deposit, and this can be depending on how you guys feel comfortable. We typically ask for half a month's rent if it's an insurance claim, or now we know if it's if it's a special case like this where it's a Rottweiler, German Shepherd, and a poodle, we'll probably ask for more. And then the last layer that we do have is the damage protection insurance. And that usually, depending on who you go with, it's usually an amount that you can actually do like a value add. So it just kind of feels like extra security without having to necessarily kind of force it on them. You'll essentially get the insurance relocation, or you'll get the insurance claim protection, the damage protection insurance on the guest, but your company as a beneficiary. So if at the end of the stay they end up leaving and there's actual damage, they can walk away. And depending on your coverage, you could get up to 5,000, 10,000. We've seen cases up to 20,000 in damage protection that you can get on top of what you already have for that instance. So that's typically what we see in terms of just having those four layers of coverage when we have some of these instances, some of these cases. What are some of the things that you've seen? Is that something that perhaps could make you a little bit more comfortable, just knowing that there's at least four layers of protection to kind of help you out on that, Gabriela?
Yes, and so, we used to do pet fees and all these different fees, but lately I've seen a lot of the adjusters barking back at that. So, I wanna see more streamlined and, because we used to do pet fees and this fee and that fee, and they don't like that. But I'd be curious to see you as a experienced corporate and insurance provider. What do you do to justify the fees, and how do you say that so they don't bark back at your proposition when you're presenting it to the insurance adjuster?
And I'll be curious to see, because typically when it comes down to the fees, also keep in mind a lot of those fees get paid by the homeowner. So
Mhm.
that homeowner doesn't necessarily have the reserves or the funds to be able to pay for those. Typically, that's where they ask a little bit more. Some of the things that we've seen is that we've actually increased the rate if they don't want to put as much deposit down to
Mhm.
justify that difference. So typically with ALE, since it's one bucket in terms of that's already predetermined funds, as opposed to the deposit that comes from the homeowner. There's a little bit more flexibility if you can increase the price by decreasing some of those fees. So that's
Mhm.
usually the way that we do it in case they don't want to put as much deposit when it comes into that. We are flexible by increasing. So we do add-ons, for example. So if you feel like that homeowner is going to bring pets, you can do a complimentary add-on cleaning, which you can do weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, depending on how you feel comfortable, and then just add that as part of the ALE pricing. Usually, we find that that's way more acceptable than adding a bunch of fees. So it would be add-ons to your proposal, and the way that you justify is based on the potential damage that they could cause to your property and some of the other things. Um, you can also stack up the premium of the damage protection insurance on top of your premium or your monthly rate. So they don't see that, but you're stacking it on top. So you can
Mhm.
add the clean fee. You can also add the damage protection premium that you would be paying every month, but they don't see that. You wouldn't itemize it.
Right.
So that's one way to also do it as well.
Sometimes I get, you start kinda worrying that, okay, you wanna be nice and you want to, because typically I think I'm undercharging a security deposit. Typically I'll do 15 to 2,000 for
Yeah.
that, but I think that's
How
a
much do
little
you
low.
typically charge? Let's say, for example, in one of your properties monthly rate.
So, typically, I'm in Atlanta, in pretty desirable neighborhoods, pretty nice school districts, flexible terms. I let them, I say, only give them a 30 notice to vacate. So, my typical price is about 8,200 comfortably per month.
And you're only doing 2,000 where you feel like perhaps you
Yeah.
should be charging like 4,000, 5,000 for
Yeah, but I
deposit.
think that I'm also thinking of the guests that just had this horrible incident happen, and then, I'm kinda thinking they're less likely to pick me if I'm overcharging security deposits because they may not have the funds. So it's
Yeah.
kind of, I wanna make sure I get the bid because my market is relatively competitive, but how do we balance that out to what's reasonable and what's going to be a winnable bid for the client who's the one forking over the money?
Yeah, no, it's definitely an interesting conversation because not everyone's policy is the same. And some people have more ALE, some have less. And so, kind of having that conversation with the guests whenever you're doing walkthroughs and just kind of gauging their feeling and what the urgency is.
Mhm,
Usually, what we see quite often is that if you're providing professional support and you're providing good terms, and you have a good understanding in general as to what the market value of like the regional properties are, you can more or
mhm,
less gauge what that ALE could be.
mhm,
Also, if you understand the demographics in your area, depending
mhm,
on the people in that general area within a mile or two, depending on their level of income, you can also gauge how much potential savings they could have. That's a little bit more advanced, but essentially, what you want to do is you want to make sure that if you're focused on insurance relocation claims, that you do
mhm,
a general market analysis in your general vicinity in terms of the area, in terms of like within a mile radius of the properties that you have, and what's the demographic look like in terms of the general population in your area. So we can definitely talk about that as well. But essentially, once you've done some of that market research, that can help you gauge, do I ask for a bigger deposit? Do I ask for a higher premium? And then I just stack up the additional cleanings, the additional um, damage protection insurance. Is there anything else that perhaps I should add on top of the pricing while still maintaining myself competitive with the actual deposit? So those are typically the way that we structure some of the proposals, depending on what we're seeing in the market analysis that we've done, and what we feel would be comfortable and competitive in terms of the deposits that the policyholders will eventually have to pay to you.
The other
So,
thing that I would share that I've done, George, is that, you go by Jorge, right, or
okay,
Jorge?
no, okay.
Um, I have made it mandatory if you have a pet, you have no choice. You're gonna have to accept the cleaning, whether
Yeah,
you like it or not. It's not
no.
an option for me.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So that's kind of what I mentioned to you. So whenever you are putting proposals and depending on how comfortable you are, instead of having it set to be on that deposit to be paid at the end, you can stack it on top of your premium. If you already have quotes as to how much your cleaners would charge you to clean after pets, you would add that on top of your monthly rate. Now you're not gonna break it down saying uh, 8,000 is gonna be my monthly rate plus 300 is gonna be the cleaning plus 100 is my damage protection. It's all inclusive. They don't see that. And actually, we've had some instances where you guys are able to charge a little bit higher of a premium and make money on that insurance premium
Mhm.
as well. We've actually done some instances where the insurance damage protection is $30 and we charge 50 for that administrative and we win on it $20. So you can as an add-on as well. So those are really good things. Is there any other stories, Ari? Is there anything you would like to share in terms of a story that has happened to you? I remember you had something in Colorado go missing. You're on mute, Ari.
No, I think definitely adding those protections that you mentioned, the pet fee, and having the insurance, absolutely, help you. Because more than not, I have seen, even you do all the betting and all the check-ins, and you think, okay, this is going to be great, then you ended up with that insurance claim. So I think the biggest lesson I have learned is to make sure I'm adding that insurance coverage. And that have saved my life more than one time. So absolutely, yeah.
The other thing that I notice a lot is the linens because, that most insurance damage protection waivers will not cover linens because they consider that wear and tear, but that's adding up very quickly, particularly with pets. And I think that's one of the things that I spent the most money on is replacing the linens because there's
Mhm.
hair all over and it's hard to wash it. So it's kind of like a big wash. You might as well assume that you're getting new linens every time somebody moves in.
So for the insurance claims that you've what's usually the length of stay that they've stayed for
My
you?
Yeah, my typical is about 2 to 3 months,
Okay.
and that's the more typical. The longest has been 7, and, for that one, I mean, there was, like, literally we had to replace every single thing, so I'm figuring that even after 3 months, it seems like that's the magic number where maybe we should be adding more,
Yeah, because
repla
yeah, some of the things that we've done, at least in our business, is that there's going to be the cost of doing business, right? Which
Mhm.
is going to be cleanings, it's going to be changing linens. If you are providing like initial supplies, that's something that would be part of those costs. Whenever you're taking a look at what you're asking, do you consider that as part of like the operating margin of things that you would be doing business? And is it worth your while to be pursuing insurance claims? Like, are you actually making money after the
Um,
expenses?
I don't know. I think I'm relatively new. I mean, I've been doing this for a couple years, but I feel like after every insurance claim, I learn something new every time. And so, I don't know because I feel like I need more guidance from
Yeah,
somebody that's been doing this, what's normal in the corporate world versus my world. You know
yeah,
what I mean? Because
no, no,
I
yeah,
feel like
no,
I feel like that's the part where I'm not there yet. I feel like we're just excited to get a nice lucrative booking, but it's a learning game and every client's different. And so just understanding kind of what things cost, I think I haven't really done a deep, deep analysis to figure out maybe I should be going up on my rate because of all these recurrent expenses that I wasn't thinking about in how I price.
no. I think that's definitely something to consider for sure. Um, One of the biggest things for us, and maybe Ari, if you have some insight too, is making sure that you're comfortable. And whenever you sit down and actually do the math, is like, what's the net margin that you're trying to get out of the bookings to make it worth your while? Because the thing that I always take a look at is like if I compare it to short term or long term, It's all this extra effort and work worth the while in terms of the opportunity cost that you could be doing something different. So yeah, definitely we can talk about that and what the numbers essentially look like, and what are some of those targets that we see in terms to make it worthwhile for us. And then that way you can take a look back and reverse engineer and see if it makes
Mhm.
sense for you as well. Because if you're managing the properties yourself, it could be like time that you could be spending elsewhere or investing your money elsewhere. It perhaps this might not be worth your while once you actually sit down and do the math. So we can definitely take a look at that as well. So keeping on with the lessons, I know we're coming up here in time. I want to make sure that we cover a couple of things in terms of patterns. In terms of red flags that we see quite often, the number one pattern that we see is making sure that we don't have an identity mismatch. So what that means is that, for example, once you get to the point where you're doing this business a little bit more of a scale, initially you might be able to meet with a person that says that's actually going to be staying at the property, or maybe someone else is booking the property on one's behalf, and they provide you the ID. We always want to make sure that that person that's actually booking the stay is the same person. I don't know,
Mhm.
have you guys had a situation like this before where you thought one person was gonna stay, and once
Yes.
you actually take a look, it was someone completely different?
Yes, and I think it's coming back to the whole insurance over trusting. You're like, "Oh, I'm renting to ALE." I mean, this hasn't happened, but it happened outside of an insurance claim where I had a tenant that was the sending me all his information and booking it, but he was booking it for his brother, and he wasn't the one staying, and the only way we figured it out was because I had asked him for an ID, and then come to think of it, the brother was staying there and he had criminal background.
Yeah.
So he had been staying there and really damaged the property. Fortunately, the brother ended up responding for the damages, but we had cameras there to prove it wasn't him. So that's the way we got away with charging him for the damages, but it was a serious headache. And so I think moving forward, I think it probably would behoove us to even also do an application and background check on the tenant, even if it's an insurance guest. I don't know if you guys do that or if
We do it on every single guest. So you're saying you're not doing it at the moment for some
not
claims?
doing it at the moment because I'm trusting because most of my guests, believe it or not, come from Airbnb and they just come off platform. That's kind of been my trend.
Oh, so you've gotten accustomed to that. I
Yeah,
know
so they find
Airbnb
me.
has built that. You'll come to find out, Gabriela, that after a while you'll know that I don't like Airbnb.
Neither
Uh,
do I.
I feel like their background check, it's really not, and they even tell you like it's not accurate or could not be accurate. So you're
Mhm.
putting complete strangers into your home if you just go through Airbnb and you're not doing your due diligence and actually making sure that the person staying it's the actual person that booked.
But what do you do when you're dealing with somebody who's a company that, and I'm dealing with that like right now as we speak, a corporate housing company that's renting it for somebody else.
So we're actually doing that right now. We have third party relocation company. They're
Mhm,
working with their insurance company. They
mhm,
will do the background check for us. If
mhm,
not, we do it ourselves. So we will
mhm.
ask for the actual client's information. We will ask for their email to make sure that we can get general information in regards to that. So either way, they're doing it and providing it to us, and the information is to match to the ID that they share with us. So it would be the name, address, any ID information that would verify that what they have done in terms of the background matches to their ID. If they're not providing it to us, we're doing it ourselves. And if neither of them is happening, we don't accept the booking. It doesn't matter how lucrative it is. They might be paying you like $10,000 a month, but if your house is worth half a million, are you really willing to put up 10,000 or half a million for $10,000 booking?
No, I think I just have to change my mentality mindset to just say, we have these systems, you're going to have to take them or leave them because
Yeah. Yeah, no,
we've
that
been there.
definitely I feel like Airbnb has trained a lot of hosts to trust too much. And I mean they even say, like I said, they even say that their verification could not be accurate as well. So yeah,
So what do
definitely.
you use to verify them? Do you use I have at least using Turbo Tenant, I have the way a way to actually background check, but do you actually also run it through an ID process or do you have a specific solution on how to do it?
So we use a company called Landlord Studio. It's a property management system, but they use a company called Trust Union. They
Or
also
transfer?
use Experian on some of the reporting. So that's the
Okay.
way that we check as well. So usually with that reporting, they do the background credit check. The other thing that they do is like if they're registered as a sex offender. So you definitely don't want to have someone that's possibly a sex offender living in your house. They also check for what's it called, the evictions. They do background credit, evictions, and then sets whatever as well. So those are some of the big ones that we take a look at whenever we're taking a look at anyone to say at any of our properties. But yeah, you definitely want to protect yourself. You want to do some of the due diligence. If those third party companies are not willing to provide that to us, it doesn't matter how lucrative the contract is. If we're not making sure that the properties either that we own or that we manage and we're fiduciary involved to make sure that we're protecting our homeowners, we definitely don't want to accept those bookings.
Okay.
The other thing that will come up is the other way that you could protect yourself is making sure that you have lease violation clause within your actual lease agreement. If the person that's actually staying at your property is not the same person, you have the right to terminate the lease without a refund, which means that if they did put a security deposit or they put any other funds up front, you are entitled to keep that money because they ended up lying and you essentially ended up blocking your calendar for that particular guest. So you could
Mm.
have lease violation clause, what it will look like in terms of unauthorized occupants. Also, if there's a limit of how many occupants can actually stay at the house at one time, and what the liability coverage could look like. And also, where, if at all, it happens, if you were to have to go to trial, what is the location that will actually protect you, right? It's going to be in your local area of Georgia, or if they're coming in from California, which jurisdiction are we going to use? So usually, at least for Georgia, from my understanding, is very much homeowner friendly as opposed to
Yes.
tenant friendly. So you want to make sure that you're protecting yourself as much as you can with the laws that you're most familiar with.
Yes, absolutely. That's why I don't invest in California yet.
Yeah, we have a couple California folks. So the other one that we see is the slow burn. So what this means is that everything is fine, the gas is fine, but then over time, over a period of time, all of a sudden everything stops working. The neighbors just start calling you to like check on the gas, see what's happening. There's a small damage that gets left throughout the property, and then when the lease ends, they refuse to vacate or actually leave the premises. Has that happened to any of you?
I had a guest that was very nice in the beginning and then got very picky and litigious, and she had a public adjuster from the get-go, so that was a red flag because she was very picky and kept complaining about all these things and was trying to get out of another Airbnb guest was trying to get out of the contract and to put her somewhere else. It was kind of a red flag that she was a complainer, and if things weren't going her way, she was going to try to, you know, get money back, or it was if it was not one thing, it was another. So it was just kind of a very difficult situation. So eventually I just wanted to get her out, so I just let her terminate just because I just wanted her out of my hair, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
No, that makes total sense. I know there's been some situations that landlords have had to pay someone to also leave their premises. I don't know if you guys have heard of that before, but I think it's called like cash for keys. That's
Yes,
usually the
yeah,
terminology, what it is. But essentially, you're paying someone to just get out and avoid all the legal fees that are happening.
yes.
U- Usually, the way that we try to prevent this with midterm rentals, there's going to be maintenance. You're going to have to change filters. There's going to have to be some communication. So the way that we approach this, essentially, there needs to be some kind of protocol of communication. Within your lease, it should state within a certain time frame, we will be doing certain things within the house, either changing filters, we will be doing scheduled maintenance. Usually, the red flag that comes with this is that they're not responding and there's no communication. Either you're giving them a call, letting them know, hey, we're going to have someone coming in into the area and we're going to change the filter, or we're going to do landscaping, but for example, it's fenced in, so they need access. Usually, we see that whenever there's zero communication after a couple of weeks. And so, usually, that's one of the things that we put in place in terms of our lease clause and lease terms is that there needs to be some kind of communication. If you don't give us access for us to be able to do some of the things that need to be done to maintain the home and making sure it's in a good condition, there will be fees added onto that.
Okay.
So basically, if you are hiring someone to actually go and take a look at the property, if they don't respond and they had already confirmed that they will be giving them access, there's going to be a fee that you would have to charge for you to be able to reschedule that provider. We've also seen instances that if, for example, if they reach out to you and they said there's an emergency that needs to happen, and for whatever reason they lock the house and you can't get in, there's an additional fee for that, for you to having to call like a locksmith to be able to get into the house if for whatever reason they changed the key or something happened. So you need to be able to be aware of that, that if that does happen, and it does happen, if you're not getting the response quickly, usually once we start seeing that within 10 to 14 days of the guest staying in with us. Now, I do understand there's privacy, there's, some people just want to be left alone, but they do need to understand that the filter will need to be changed. There's going to be maintenance that will need to happen. So there still needs to be that back and forth communication. And once you're not getting that, that's usually a red flag that we look for someone that's potentially going to be a slow burn for us. So that's another one. So I know we've gone over time. I'll quickly go over the last three. I'll just kind of mention what they are, and then we're good to go. So the third one is the corporate handoff gap. So what that means is that an employee essentially has no skin in the game. The company has paid for them completely, and essentially the employee feels entitled, right? They don't have any skin in the game. It feels like a hotel. They don't have responsibility in terms of what the house should be. And damage occurs, company disputes invoices, and then you're stuck in the middle. Because right now, essentially, what you're doing is if you're only working with the company that's actually doing the work and they're only in charge of the invoice and making sure everything gets paid, if you don't have that communication with the guests and they have a good understanding as to what the expectations are, it could lead to something like that could cause damage over time. And then the company, since they're not necessarily involved, you essentially get stuck in the middle with the damages that get done. So usually what that looks like is the company will send out a request, you'll fulfill it, and then they'll bring in one guest. Now, because the guest wasn't necessarily involved in the lease, but the lease was actually involved with the actual company, there's no expectation from the actual employee. So the way that we go around that is that the actual company will actually be the company leasing, and then the occupant would actually be the employee. So what that means is that the employee would actually have to sign your lease and agree to your terms to ensure that if whatever happens, they're also liable for damages. So in some instances, I know we've had some third-party companies just sign the lease with us and then sublease it to their clients. So what you would want to do to protect yourself and ensure that the actual occupant has read your policies in place is that you want to add them as an additional occupant and that they sign off on your lease as well. So at that point, there's no guessing whether or not they read your letter, your actual lease agreement, and ensure that they agree to your terms. One recent one that we've had is we call this one the dispute bomber. And actually, this happened to one of my friends. Ari, you might be familiar with this story. But essentially, so they stay with us, or they stay with my friend, and they ended up doing $1,000 worth of damage into one of their bathtubs. What ended up happening is they use toilet to clean some dye. I'm guessing they had some kind of party that they dyed their hair, and the bathtub was covered with that dye. I think it was like red or something like that, but it was very hard to take off. So what they ended up using is toilet cleaner, and that toilet cleaner has some really harsh chemicals for bathtubs. So the bathtub itself ended up having really bad markings that you can't really take off with anything. Like they're going to be permanent, and you can see it clearly. Basically, there's stripes that you would have in your bathtub, and that you can really take off because the toilet cleaner is very acidic. So in order for you to fix that, you have to essentially refinish the whole bathtub. So it's $1,000 that essentially a professional went out and did the assessment and said it's going to cost you about $1,000 to get it back to how it was. Now, in this particular case, the booking for my friend was through Airbnb, and they ended up filing a claim with Airbnb. I think it's called Air Cover, something like that.
Yeah.
And they were denied, or no, the actual guest ended up doing a retaliatory 1-star review. And if you're familiar with Airbnb, you already know a 1-star review is killer for your listing. So these are the type of guests that you'll have sometimes that everything looks good and fine. You end up filing a claim, and then ultimately they do a retaliatory review on your business. And if you're dependent on Airbnb to dispute that, there's really nothing you can do if Airbnb doesn't actually hold them accountable. So you're gonna have some of those guys that also all of a sudden they're very over communicative, they're very aggressive at checkout. And so the way that we protect ourselves is making sure the way that we've instructed our cleaners is that before someone else checks in, they need to have time-stamped videos and photos of the work that they have done before the guest has left, the prior guest has left. And whenever a new guest checks in, what's that condition? So we need to understand the last guest, what the condition was of the overall house, if they saw anything in particular that was perhaps damaged, and we have already noted. A new guest checks in, they live through the house, and once they check out, there's a timestamp as well of the same things. So, what was it before? What was it after? Just to make sure that you're protecting yourself, that you have timestamp videos and photos of what was the before and after condition. Because ultimately, what you want to prove is that this is the condition how it was before, this is the condition after. Anything that could have happened was within this stay. So making sure that you have those, especially when you work with your cleaners, a lot of them are, you want to make sure that you treat them as professionals. They're going to be part of your team. So you want to make sure that you have that information available, and that if they're not willing to do that, they're not willing to elevate to that standard, perhaps you might consider checking out other vendors that would be willing to get to that standard with you. Now, the last one, Ari, I don't know if you're familiar with this one, is the ghost. Have you ever had a ghost checking into one of your properties?
No, but I did have a friend that had a person that checked in and then wanna leave the house because they said the house was ghosted. I don't know if you guys have heard that, but it was the weirdest thing to me. And then the person's like, no, I cannot stay in this house. And I think the person has certain belief and things. But yeah, that was
So one of the things, so when it comes down to ghosts, maybe Gabriela, you might be familiar with this one. I don't know if you had this situation before. So you sign a lease, so the lease is active, the company has paid, but for whatever reason or another, the guest never shows up. Have you had that situation happen before, Gabriela?
I've heard of it. I've heard of it, but,
So this one is interesting. It's particularly dangerous, especially during the winter months. Okay. So think about it, right? It's winter, it's snowing, there's no one in the house to turn up the AC. There's no one in the house to like actually crank up the little faucet to let the water drip. There's no one in the house to like open up the cabinets to let air in. And so all of a sudden, something that would have been a very lucrative um, lease agreement as ends up being a burst pipe at your house. So just think
Mm.
about that for a second, right? So if there's no one at the house and it's winter and you're not protecting your house and you're giving them instructions as to what to do to prevent burst pipes from happening, it could be something that could be very expensive to fix. So just keep in mind if there's no one at the house, you still want to have access to be able to go into the house. So any guess that so essentially when it comes onto list, so ultimately everything goes back to your list. You need to have language in there if you're providing instructions and they're not responding within a certain time frame in terms of some of the instructions that you're providing, you are um, essentially making this as if they have abandoned the house and you have the right to go into the house to make those changes for them. So what that means is
Mhm.
that if they're not, if you have sent out some of this requests yourself and said, "Hey, by the way, there's going to be a huge snowstorm coming in. It's going to be like negative 10 degrees outside. It's really going to be cold. I want to make sure that we're protecting the house. Here's your instructions." And one day has passed, they haven't confirmed. Another day has passed, they haven't said anything. A third day has passed. That's enough reasonableness for you to be able to go into the house or even get someone to go into the house and do those changes to ensure that you're protecting the house.
Without that's just giving you that flexibility without the permission. I did have something happen where the guest checked out early and didn't tell me, and then what ended up happening is we got a leak in the dishwasher, and then I
Mhm.
charged her for the damage because she didn't disclose to me she checked out early.
Yeah, that's another thing, right? So it's essentially the same thing as they didn't tell you they were gonna leave early. So yeah, it's within your right to be able to charge some of those things, but making sure that you're adding those to the leases. So if there's no communication, regardless if they're leaving early or they're not checking in at all, because we have some situations where some guests have said, "Well, we're gonna be here for 3 months, but we're actually not gonna be here for like the first half of the first month." So just so you're aware, we're gonna go ahead and lease it in case we do actually come in time. So they're buying that convenience of actually staying at the property in case they do need to check in, but they have the right to stay in later. But the main thing is like if there's an emergency, if there's gonna be really bad inclement weather, you need to be able to tell them, hey, this is the protocol that we're gonna follow. We're gonna provide you instructions as to what needs to happen. And if you don't respond within a certain time frame, we have the right to do this and send someone out. So we're giving you notice. Usually, in general, it's at least 24-hour notice. But for some of these instances, you do want to be a little bit more flexible. So it depends on how comfortable you are. It could be as soon as 24 hours. But if they're usually pretty good at responding, 24 hours should be enough. If they're not responding, we usually go up to 3 days to make sure that we give it enough time in case they ended up traveling or they're going somewhere or they're going back home for whatever reason. So we just want to make sure that there's a protocol in place that if someone does end up becoming a ghost and there's emergency situations, that you have the right to protect your assets.
Very good point. On that note, do you give them access to the ADT
In some cases, yeah, yeah, we do. So we would add them as a
queries?
guest. Yeah, as a
Mm,
guest, it wouldn't be like an admin or anything like that.
okay.
Yeah, so we do in some of those cases as well. But yeah, no more than anything, it's just making sure that you have that flexibility if there's really bad weather or there's something that it's going to be an emergency and they're not responding. You or your staff have the right to go into the house, make those quick changes, get out, and then be on your way. So by implementing those five things that I had mentioned, right, you're gonna cover yourself in terms of some of the damages and some of the things that we talked about. So making sure that you're protecting yourself with appropriate fees, insurance, making sure that you're adding clauses in your policies to ensure that you don't have that slow burn that you have, the corporate handoff, making sure that you have clear expectations, that you have before and after photos, if in case there's a potential dispute that happens all of a sudden, and ensure that you have flexibility with your lease in case there needs to happen something within the house, and you have that flexibility to go into the house without necessarily having permission from the guest if they're not responding. So all this will help you. This is from years and years of practice and making sure that we'll cover our ass. So we want to make sure that this is passed on to everyone in the community, and that everyone is able to share best practices and things that they've learned themselves from some of these horror stories. So with that, we're gonna go ahead and leave out the session. Let me know if there's any other topic that you would like to cover. I know Ari is asking a couple of other people in terms of topics, but if there's something in particular that you want us to discuss, I know for next week we're trying to do something for lead generation as well. How to actually get leads directly for businesses. So we'll be covering that probably next week as well. We're trying to line up a special guest as well. So with that, is there anything else you guys want to talk about? Is there any other horror stories that you guys feel like perhaps we should share last second?
No, but I'm wondering if you guys are attending the San Diego Midterm Rental Summit.
That's a pretty good question. I think it's still up in the air, but yeah, that's definitely something we're considering. Will you be attending, Gabriela?
Yes, I will.
You already got your ticket and
I
booked
did.
the flight.
Well, I live in San Diego, so it's very easy for me to make it 'cause it's always here.
No, you got it. It's
I'll
all
just
good.
I'll just have to ditch work for that because I'm supposed to be working, but I'm gonna plan to ditch work.
Yeah, take your time off. All right, sounds good. Well, thank you,
That's a good
everyone. It's a good way to invest your time and money for sure.
yeah.
All right, thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.